I hadn't even been home 5 minutes before I knew this funeral was going to be a disaster. It started with the looks. You know, the kind, those little glances people give when they don't want to say something, but they definitely want you to notice they're thinking it. The suits. The forced smiles. And then there was her. Stephanie. My half-sister. Same father, different mothers. Her mom, Evelyn, married my dad a year after my mom died. I was 4. Stephanie showed up 5 years later, and I've been invisible in my own family ever since. I walked into the church wearing my full Navy service dress uniform, not because I wanted to show off, but because my dad always said how proud he was when I wore it. He'd come to my OCS graduation. Front row, tears in his eyes. That memory was the only thing holding me together when I saw who was sitting in his front pew seat now. Stephanie, legs crossed, phone in hand, like it was a damn brunch. The moment I approached, she looked me up and down like I'd shown up in a clown costume. "Oh," she said, loud enough for the entire row to hear. "You wore that?" I didn't respond. I gave her a nod and walked past her to find my seat second row. Not where I belonged, not where he would have wanted me, but clearly this wasn't about what Dad wanted anymore. The service itself was bearable, until the eulogy. Stephanie marched up to the podium, holding a perfectly typed speech, smiling like a campaign wife at a press conference. She started talking about our father's legacy and how he taught us to lead. I stared at the floor, listening to her rewrite history in real time. This was the girl who got kicked out of 3 colleges, drained 2 of Dad's business accounts to start a fashion wellness brand, and once tried to sue her ex-boyfriend for posting a photo of her without a filter. And now she was talking about leadership? Then came the moment. She looked right at me from the podium, smirked, and said, "Dad always told me leadership wasn't about uniforms or ranks, it was about heart. Some people wear uniforms hoping to be respected, others earn respect by being real." That one landed. I actually felt the entire room shift. Heads turned toward me. No one said a word. My jaw clenched so tight I thought I'd crack a molar. After the service, people gathered outside for the reception. I tried to slip away, but Evelyn cornered me near the church steps. She looked at me like I was a maintenance worker, showing up late. "You didn't need to wear the uniform, Rachel. This isn't the Navy." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, it's a funeral." She blinked, then smiled one of those condescending little smiles that meant, I won. Stephanie joined her 2 seconds later, holding a champagne flute like we were at a wedding. "You know," Stephanie said, "Dad updated his will last year. He wanted things to go to people who were actually around." There it was. She wanted me to react. I didn't give her the satisfaction. "Then," she added, loud and clear, "he didn't leave anything for a Navy robot, especially not one who couldn't be bothered to visit unless there was a flag involved. That did it." I turned to leave. Everyone had heard it. No one said a word. Not even our aunts or cousins or old family friends. Silence. Again. I made it to my car, sat behind the wheel, and stared at the dashboard. 35 years old. 15 years in the Navy, 2 tours, command-level clearance. And somehow, this girl, this spoiled, vindictive influencer wannabe, was making me feel like I was 5 years old again, standing outside a locked bedroom door while my dad tucked her in. But Stephanie didn't know everything. Because what she didn't realize was that in the trunk of my car, locked inside an old fireproof document case, was the original version of my dad's will. Not the one she and her mother helped him update last year when he was already sick. Not the one their lawyer would read out next week. The real one. The one he signed before the cancer. The one he gave to me for safekeeping during my last visit home. He told me not to open it until after he was gone. I hadn't. But I remembered every word he said that day. "If anything ever seems off, Rachel, follow the paper trail. You know how to do that better than anyone." He wasn't wrong. That uniform they mocked, that rank they sneered at, it didn't just come with medals, it came with training, strategy, patience, and discipline. I hadn't survived boot camp, Bahrain, and bureaucratic hell just to be humiliated by my half-sister in kitten heels. This wasn't about revenge. It was about setting things right. Because the man they buried today was the only person who ever believed in me without conditions, and I was going to honor him in the only way I knew how, by proving he didn't raise a fool. And if you're still watching right now, let me know in the comments what your most awkward family funeral moment was, and don't forget to subscribe. You're going to want to see how this unfolds. Back at home, I finally opened the document case. Thick envelope, wax seal. No drama, no mystery. Just clean paperwork, notarized, witnessed by two of his oldest business partners. Everything about it was legit. His handwriting, his signature, his instructions. It was all there. The will, the trust, the fallback clauses. And my name first, middle, and last listed as the primary beneficiary of the company, the house, and the entire estate. Stephanie's name was there too, but with conditions. Strict ones. The kind you put in when you don't quite trust someone not to screw it all up. It wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that he saw her clearly, that behind all the forced smiles and social media posts, he knew what kind of person she really was. And that maybe, just maybe, he knew this day would come. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Not because of the will itself, but because of how obvious everything suddenly became. All those years, I thought I was imagining it, how Evelyn treated me like a tenant in my own home, how Stephanie always got the benefit of the doubt, even when she wrecked Dad's car or failed another semester. Turns out, I wasn't crazy. I was just outnumbered. The next morning, I made coffee in my tiny rental kitchen, like it was any other day, except it wasn't. Because now I had a truth in my hands that no one else knew, and I wasn't sure who I could trust with it. Growing up, I spent most of my time doing one of three things: reading, cleaning up messes I didn't make, or waiting for my dad to come home so I could have 5 minutes of feeling like I mattered. My mom died when I was 3, so I don't remember her. All I had were photos, a few home videos, and the stories Dad would tell when he'd had a glass of wine and thought I was asleep. 1 year after she passed, Evelyn moved in. It wasn't subtle. One day, I had my own space. The next there was a woman rearranging furniture and making suggestions about how little girls should behave. Within a month, I stopped speaking at dinner. Within a year, I stopped being asked if I had anything to say. When Stephanie was born, I remember standing outside her nursery door while everyone fussed over her, and Dad was just gone. Physically there, but emotionally somewhere else. He loved me. I never doubted that. But he started dividing his time like it was a limited resource. And Evelyn? She was never subtle about whose child I was. Stephanie had ballet. I got chores. Stephanie crashed her bike. Evelyn blamed the sidewalk. I got grounded for not watching her better. I could recite every excuse they made for her, every time I was told to be the bigger person, the more mature one, the responsible sister, and for years, I bought into it. Thought maybe if I just worked harder, stayed quieter, earned more medals, they'd finally see me. By the time I graduated high school, I'd already applied to the Navy without telling anyone. I didn't need a send-off. I needed distance. And the Navy? It gave me exactly what I'd been starving for: structure, purpose, and people who didn't care about family trees. Still, every leave I took, I came home hoping something had changed. But Stephanie only got louder, and Evelyn only got colder. The last time I visited before Dad got sick, I walked in on Stephanie yelling about how Dad had promised her control of the company after college. She didn't even notice me standing there. She never did. But Dad did. That night, he came into the guest room where I was staying, the room that used to be mine before it became Evelyn's sewing room, then a storage room, then where Rachel can stay if she insists on visiting. He sat on the edge of the bed, handed me a folder, and said, "This is the real one. If anything feels off after I'm gone, read it." I asked him if Evelyn knew. He didn't answer right away. Just stared at the floor and said, "She doesn't need to know everything." Now, months later, holding that same folder, I realized he knew. He always knew. About the manipulation, the pressure, the gaslighting. He just didn't know how to fix it. Or maybe he didn't have the energy left to fight anymore. I scanned the documents again, making mental notes. The real will had clauses, very specific ones, about Stephanie's access to funds. Her inheritance was conditional, tied to performance metrics within the company. If she failed to meet them, the shares would revert back to the trust. A trust I now controlled. It wasn't revenge. It was accountability. I went into full mission mode. I dug out my old laptop, the one I used during deployments, and started building a timeline. Every time Evelyn pushed me out, every time Stephanie got bailed out, every time the official version of what happened didn't match what I knew to be true. There were so many of them. Credit cards in the company's name used for shopping trips, travel expenses billed to client development when the only client was Stephanie's on-again, off-again boyfriend. The more I pulled, the more it unraveled, and none of it surprised me. What surprised me was how calm I felt. I wasn't angry. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even shaking. I'd spent a lifetime being the quiet one, the reasonable one, the professional. And now? That same discipline they mocked was the thing that would undo everything they'd built on lies. I didn't need a confrontation. I needed facts, receipts, documentation. Everything had to be airtight, because Evelyn would fight dirty, and Stephanie would spin the narrative faster than a PR team on election night. I already knew how this would look if I wasn't prepared. The bitter sister. The military hard-ass. The one who took things too far. That's the version they'd try to sell. But I knew who I was. And more importantly, I knew who my father raised me to be. At noon, I made my first call. Not to a lawyer. Not to a journalist. To Carla Adams, Dad's longtime accountant, the one Stephanie had fired 6 months before his death for inefficiency. I asked Carla to meet. She agreed without hesitation. And just like that, the next step began. Carla showed up at the little corner cafe like she was walking into a mission briefing, black pantsuit, folder under one arm, sunglasses she didn't take off until she was seated. It had been almost a year since I last saw her, and even though she was pushing 70, she still had that same sharp energy, like a woman who triple-checks everything and sleeps with one eye open. I slid the will across the table. She didn't touch it, just scanned the signature and said, "This is the one he told me about before they froze me out." I leaned in. "What did they say when they let you go?" Carla smirked. "Stephanie said I was too old school and not flexible enough." Evelyn didn't say a word, just smiled like she'd already won. "I told them firing me wouldn't erase the truth. It's still on Play Store." That was all I needed to hear. For the next 40 minutes, Carla walked me through what she knew. Bank transfers, asset movements, updates, to trust structures, none of it illegal on the surface, but shady enough to stink. Especially the part where Dad's personal account, which had always carried a healthy buffer, was practically empty 6 weeks before he passed. Carla had tried to flag it, but Evelyn intercepted everything near the end. The same Evelyn who now lived in the family house, wore designer silk robes, and posted Facebook status updates about grieving with grace. "You want to prove misappropriation," Carla said, tapping the table. "You'll need to trace the company books. The official ones, and the shadow ones." I already knew what that meant. The shell companies, the side projects, the non-profits that weren't really non-profit. Dad once mentioned he was worried the family business was being used as a personal piggy bank. That was 2 years before he got sick. He said it in passing, like a man who was testing whether he could trust someone with the full story. I hadn't pushed at the time. I was deployed, tired, and used to people saying too much and nothing at all. But now, I wished I'd asked for everything. Carla handed me a USB. "I don't have full records. Stephanie locked me out of the back end months before I was let go. But this has partial ledgers from last year. It should be enough to spot patterns. If you're as good with numbers as your father always said you were." I thanked her, paid for her coffee, and drove straight home. That night, I didn't go out, didn't answer texts. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, booted up the laptop, and spent the next 6 hours cross-referencing ledgers, timestamps, and transaction memos. What I found wasn't shocking. It was worse than that. It was predictable. Stephanie had been reimbursing herself for executive travel. Even during months she posted vacation photos from Bali, Paris, and, Once, a healing retreat in Sedona. The company had paid for a Tesla, 2 months of personal chef services, and something called personal branding consulting, which I was 90% sure was just a guy on Instagram who taught her how to use filters. One memo stood out: $12,000 for strategic image rehabilitation, the week after she'd been called out for plagiarizing a blog post about grief. You cannot make this stuff up. The more I clicked, the angrier I got, not at the theft, but at how easy they thought it would be to bury me, like I wouldn't notice, like I wouldn't fight back. Like I was still 15, eating reheated lasagna, while Evelyn told Stephanie how special her energy was. They weren't just stealing from the company, they were erasing my father's legacy, turning his life's work into a lifestyle fund for a woman who hadn't worked a real day in her life. The most infuriating part? No one else seemed to care. That's when I remembered Susan. Susan Pratt had been Dad's executive assistant for over a decade. Fierce, discreet, loyal. She retired early last year, shortly after Evelyn started streamlining operations. It was always fishy. Susan would never just walk away from the man she practically built the company alongside. I found her number buried in my old phone backups. Called. Straight to voicemail. I tried again the next day. This time, sending a message explaining who I was and what I needed. 5 hours later, she replied, "Come to the house. I've been waiting for this call." I drove 2 hours across state lines to a quiet neighborhood, where she lived in a little white house that smelled like citrus and clean books. She didn't waste time. Led me to her office, pulled a binder from a locked cabinet, and placed it on the desk like she'd been rehearsing this moment for months. "I knew you'd show up eventually," she said. "Your dad said you'd know when it was time." In none place. Inside the binder, printed emails, old memos, handwritten notes from meetings. Evelyn and Stephanie thought no one was documenting. Nothing damning on its own, but together? A picture, a pattern, a playbook. Susan had seen it all before. She told me Evelyn started isolating Dad once he got sick, told staff to send everything through her first, intercepted legal documents, redirected his calls. One time, Dad asked Susan to bring him the trust paperwork. The next day, she was locked out of the office. "That's not incompetence," Susan said. "That's a cover-up." I left her house with a folder full of evidence, and a head full of names. This wasn't just a shady inheritance grab. It was coordinated, deliberate, and targeted. And if they thought they'd buried everything with my father, they'd forgotten one thing. I'd spent my whole career learning how to dig through layers of deception, and I was just getting started. I parked 3 blocks away from the house and walked the rest of the way with the binder in my backpack and a poker face locked in. I'd learned long ago how to look unbothered. Navy training teaches you that: how to mask fatigue, control your breathing, keep your mind sharp even when your stomach is in knots. You don't win battles by flinching. And I wasn't walking into a house. I was walking into enemy-held territory. It was a casual family dinner. That's what Evelyn had called it, her way of keeping things normal. Normal meant Stephanie would hold court at the head of the table, wearing something expensive and pretending she had a clue about business. Evelyn would talk about community events and donations the company made under her guidance, and I would sit in silence while they updated me on decisions I was never part of. Except this time, I wasn't here for a seat at the table. I was here to take it back. Stephanie opened the door herself. She looked surprised to see me, like she thought I'd moved on or rolled over. "Rachel, you actually came," she said, voice dripping in the same sarcasm she used at the funeral when she mocked my uniform. I just smiled. "It's Dad's house. I still know the code." She led me in like a hostess at a restaurant she didn't own. The living room was staged, fancy throw pillows, curated bookshelves, candles flickering like this was some sort of spa retreat. Evelyn appeared from the kitchen with a wine glass in hand, and that tight smile she saved for photo ops and enemies. "Rachel, how nice of you to join us," she said. "No need to pretend," I replied. "We all know why I'm really here." There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough for Stephanie to realize I wasn't playing my usual role, the polite, accomplished, distant sister who keeps the peace. "This version of me? She didn't know how to handle it yet. Dinner was served. Steak, roasted vegetables, some kind of wild rice. I didn't eat much. I was too busy watching, reading every twitch in Evelyn's expression, every sideways glance between her and Stephanie. And when she finally brought up the legal transition of Dad's assets, I saw my opening. I put down my fork and said, calmly, "You may want to pause any transitions. I've reviewed Dad's real will." The silence was sharp. Evelyn's smile cracked. Stephanie choked on her wine. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn asked, already defensive. "I mean the original will, the one Dad gave me in confidence, the one that's legally binding and makes me the primary trustee of the Bennett Trust, the one your version conveniently ignored." Stephanie scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Dad left me the company because he knew I understood vision. You don't even like being part of the family business." "Maybe not," I said. "But I don't like seeing it used as a credit card either." Evelyn snapped. "You're being dramatic. Your father was sick. He changed things at the end for clarity." "He didn't change anything. You tried to make it look like he did." "I have contrast to's take." I pulled the binder from my bag and placed it on the table. Stephanie leaned over it like she was scanning a menu. She flipped through the first few pages, then looked up, pale. "You went digging," she said, like I'd committed some personal betrayal. "No," I said. "I went verifying. It's what I do. Military compliance, remember?" I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The data spoke for itself: financial inconsistencies, duplicate invoices, private expenses labeled as business development. The kind of stuff a first-year audit intern could catch if they weren't told to look the other way. Stephanie tried to shift gears. "Okay, fine. Maybe there were some accounting errors. But that doesn't change the fact that Dad wanted the company to evolve. He told me that. Dad also told Susan to keep records in case anything evolved without proper documentation. Which it did." Evelyn stood up, glass trembling in her hand. "You don't understand, Rachel. You've always been outside this family. You left, you put on a uniform and disappeared. We were the ones here. We kept things going." "No," I said, standing too. "You rewrote the narrative while I was serving my country. And now you're angry that I came back with facts instead of flowers." Stephanie threw her napkin on the table. "So what's your plan, Rachel? Sue us? Humiliate your family? Post a thread online about how evil your sister is?" I leaned in, elbows on the table. "My plan is simple. I'm initiating a formal review of the trust's management and requesting a forensic audit of the company's last 2 fiscal years. Every cent will be accounted for. If anything's out of place, it becomes a civil and possibly criminal matter. And if either of you interfere, I'll file an injunction." Evelyn's jaw clenched. Stephanie looked like she was trying not to scream. I didn't flinch, not because I wasn't scared, but because I knew exactly what they'd try next. They'd go quiet. Regroup. Launch a PR story about the estranged veteran's sister trying to steal from grieving women. Maybe leak something to the press. Maybe play victim. But none of it would change the truth. Stephanie crossed her arms. "You're really going to war with your own family?" I grabbed my bag, looked her dead in the eye. "No, I'm just finally fighting like one." My phone rang less than 12 hours later. Private number. I picked up, already knowing it wasn't friendly. "You think threatening your own family makes you some kind of hero?" Stephanie's voice, tense and clipped. "No hello, no formality. I think exposing theft makes me responsible," I said, not breaking stride as I walked toward my office. I had a full day of base reports to file and a compliance review due by EOD. Civilian drama or not, the Navy didn't care about trust fund soap operas. She laughed dry. "Fake. You know what this is really about? Jealousy. Dad finally saw what I was capable of, and you couldn't stand it. I've been in active duty for 15 years. If I was chasing validation, I'd be a different kind of mess. Everything was fine until you started poking around." "No," I said, opening my office door. "Everything looked fine, because you knew no one would question a grieving daughter holding a glass of wine." I hung up before she could twist it further. The emotional manipulation was textbook. Stephanie liked to bait people into arguments, where she could play the misunderstood victim. But this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was documentation. I called the family business accountant next. A man named Tony Patel, new, sharp, and hired just months before Dad passed. When I mentioned my name and reason for calling, there was a long pause. "I figured this was coming," he said. We met later that afternoon in a quiet diner near the marina. Tony was young, maybe late 30s, but his eyes looked older, tired. He'd seen things. He placed his phone face down on the table before speaking. "Off the record? Officially? No. But you're not the only one taking risks." He nodded. "Look, I've tried raising concerns. There are major inconsistencies in executive reimbursements, especially tied to Stephanie and Evelyn's expenses. Most are labeled vaguely branding, consulting, retreats, but they don't align with any legitimate business activity. Did you flag them?" "Every time. But the board is stacked with Evelyn's friends, all rubber stamps." He showed me one spreadsheet from Q2. Almost $90,000 in strategic partnerships. When cross-checked with the vendor list, it was mostly LLCs tied to lifestyle influencers and personal coaches, one of whom was literally Stephanie's former roommate from NYU, who now ran a TikTok channel about manifesting luxury. End quote. "You have copies of the vendor invoices?" "All of them." "And backups?" Tony gave me a look like he'd been waiting his whole career for someone to ask that. 3 encrypted drives. I don't trust their cloud, or their version of archiving. I asked him one last thing. "If you were deposed tomorrow, would you testify?" He didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." That night, I started building the audit packet. Not just a call-out, this was a full investigative file, with citations, timeline breakdowns, and source references. I backed everything to an external drive, and sent a copy to my JAG contact under encrypted email. I didn't need Navy legal involved yet, but I wanted it logged. In my world, you always leave a trail. 3 days later, I submitted the formal request for internal trust review and audit to the legal trustee board. It went through a firm in D.C. Dad had appointed them in his original will. The will, Evelyn buried. They responded in under 6 hours. Review accepted. You will be contacted by our appointed forensic auditors within 48 hours. Please maintain confidentiality and preserve all related documents. Stephanie must have gotten the notification because she showed up uninvited to my apartment that same night. She was in heels and a blazer, like she was heading to a deposition she didn't prepare for. No makeup, messy hair, not a good sign. I didn't invite her in. She launched right in. "What do you even want, Rachel? Money? The house? Just say it. I want the truth to be documented. And I want Dad's name cleared of every stupid decision you tried to blame on his illness. You think some audit's going to fix anything? You're making us look like criminals. If the audit finds crimes, that's not my doing, that's yours. You're blowing up this family for what? Ego? No," I said. "For the record." Her eyes flared. "You don't belong in this family." "You're right," I said, "because I earned everything I have. You inherited your delusions." Stephanie's voice dropped. "You think this won't touch you? You really think the press won't eat up the fact that a Navy officer is attacking her grieving family?" I didn't blink. Let them try. Unlike you, I've never had to delete my search history. She left after that. No grand exit, no parting shot. Just the sound of her heels, clicking down the hallway, like a retreating army that didn't expect to be met with resistance. The next morning, the audit team made contact. 3 specialists, independent, silent, precise. One of them was a woman named Kara Lynn, former IRS compliance lead. She said exactly 9 words on our call. "If there's something to find, we'll find it." She wasn't wrong. Within the first week, they'd flagged a dozen shell companies, 3 forged vendor agreements, and 1 apartment in Miami being paid for by the business, but leased under Stephanie's old alias. That's when I realized the audit wasn't just validating my suspicions, it was building a legal noose, 1 expense report at a time. I was walking across base when the first text hit my phone, then another, and another. I didn't even have to unlock the screen. The preview bubbles told me everything. Girl, did you see what Stephanie just posted? You're going viral. Not in a good way. Your sister is going full PR stunt. It's messy. I opened Instagram and saw it instantly. Stephanie had posted a series of black and white photos from Dad's funeral. One of her in tears, one holding Evelyn's hand, and of course, one of me in my Navy uniform cropped so tightly you'd think I was the guest speaker at the memorial instead of his daughter. The caption read, "Grief is hard. It's even harder when people try to twist your pain into profit. I've stayed silent, but not anymore. My sister, who hasn't been part of our family for over a decade, is now launching attacks and investigations in the middle of our mourning. This is not what Dad would have wanted. Some uniforms may come with medals, but they don't come with empathy." That last line? I actually laughed. Stephanie had always been skilled at rewriting history. Now, she was rewriting the present, live, and in real time for her 9,000 followers, half of whom were probably bots or skincare companies. And of course, the comments section was lighting up like a dumpster fire. "You're so strong, babe. People get weird when there's money involved. Tell your sister to go back to the Navy and stay there." Stephanie wasn't just fighting back, she was framing me as the villain. And the worst part? She was gaining traction. By lunchtime, Evelyn had posted too, a longer note clearly written by a PR ghostwriter that leaned into the grieving widow blindsided by her stepdaughter's betrayal angle. She didn't name me directly, but she didn't have to. People connected the dots. And some of them started messaging me. "How could you attack your own family? Your dad would be ashamed." Wow. Navy officer with no class. By 3 p.m., I was in a conference room with my CO Commander Rains. He'd called me in for what he described as a heads up, not a dressing down. His tone was firm, but not hostile. "Look, Rachel, we're proud of your service. Your record is clean. You've done everything right. But public drama tied to legal accusations? It reflects on the uniform, you know that." "I'm not the one who made it public," I said. He sighed. "I get it. Just be smart. And if this escalates, loop in JAG, sooner than later. Don't let this become your problem on both fronts." I left the meeting feeling exactly like I did the first time I got caught in crossfire during joint training. Slightly winded, but weirdly clear. Stephanie's plan wasn't just damage control. It was offense. She wanted to create noise. Enough to drown out the facts. Enough to muddy my motives. To make it look like I was the one disrupting peace. But I knew something she didn't. This wasn't about me anymore. That night, I had dinner with Susan, Dad's former assistant, the one who'd slipped me the backup binder. She'd been staying quiet out of fear, but when I called, she didn't hesitate. "I figured it was only a matter of time," she said over soup. "Your father was meticulous. He knew Stephanie and Evelyn were circling like vultures. Did he ever say anything directly?" Susan hesitated. "Not outright. He wasn't confrontational like that. But he asked me to pull copies of everything. Contracts, vendor lists, even his medical records. He said, and I quote, 'In case someone tries to use my death as a business strategy.'" I paused. "He said that?" "Verbatim." Susan then handed me a sealed envelope. "Your dad gave me this 6 months before he passed. Told me to give it to you if things got ugly. And Ondavind." I opened it right there. Inside was a letter in his handwriting. Short, direct, just like him. "Rachel, if this lands in your hands, then I was right to worry. Trust your gut. The company is yours legally and ethically. You were the only one who asked how it ran, not just what it was worth. Stephanie's smart, but her hunger is louder than her judgment. Evelyn never saw the business, she saw the money. You're the only one I'd want at the helm. Don't let the noise shake your mission. Love you always, Dad." There was no anger in the letter, no drama, just facts, and trust, and it changed everything. Because in one page, my father had given me not just a blessing but proof of intent. The kind of evidence that courts love and lawyers frame. I scanned the letter that night, added it to the audit packet. Then I emailed it to the trust's legal team with one sentence. Attached is a handwritten note from Benjamin Bennett, confirming intent regarding the trust and company succession. Original available upon request. The next morning, The forensic audit team sent me their week 2 summary. Stephanie's name appeared in red 3 times. Evelyn's name appeared in bold once. Underneath, preliminary assessment suggests intentional misappropriation of funds, falsification of operational expenses, and unauthorized asset diversion. I didn't celebrate, not yet, because this wasn't a win. This was a reckoning. And the world was finally starting to pay attention. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished tile, exactly the kind of place where truth got suffocated under procedure. But this time, the truth had backup. 3 terabytes of it. Stephanie and Evelyn had filed a motion to block the audit results from being admitted into probate. Their argument? That I had conflicted interests due to my military background and estranged relationship with the family. That part made me laugh out loud when I read it. The judge didn't laugh, but she didn't buy it either. Judge Martha Langley was a straight-talking, no-nonsense former civil litigator who wore her glasses low and her sarcasm high. During the initial hearing, she cut off Evelyn mid-sob story with a dry, "Let's stick to verifiable events, not emotional theater please." Music to my ears. The trust's legal team had already submitted the real will, Dad's real will, retrieved officially from the law firm in D.C., the one with notarized pages, video verification, and time-stamped backups from 5 years prior. The court accepted it into evidence within the first 15 minutes of proceedings. Stephanie visibly blanched. The courtroom was small, more conference room than law and order. It wasn't packed, but enough extended family had shown up for moral support, or maybe just for entertainment. Hard to tell with my Aunt Carol's popcorn bucket and constant whispering. The depositions began with Tony Patel, the company's accountant. He walked the court through fraudulent expense reports, wire transfers to shell companies, and a Miami condo that had been leased in Evelyn's maiden name. His delivery was calm, clinical, and completely damning. Then came Cara Lynn, the forensic auditor. She didn't waste time on fluff. She opened with, "Our investigation found systematic misappropriation of trust funds totaling approximately $1.2 million over 3 fiscal years. And then she brought receipts. Literally. Box after box of them. Stephanie tried to argue it was a misunderstanding in accounting workflows. Cara simply said, "No workflow includes payments to a branding consultant with an expired business license and no tax filings for 4 years. That consultant, by the way, was Stephanie's ex-boyfriend, the one who'd once tried to get a startup going by selling luxury water from a garden hose. Then my moment came. The trust lawyers called me to the stand. I walked up in full Navy uniform, not for intimidation, but because it was my scheduled uniformed day on base, and I wasn't about to change for court theater." Evelyn rolled her eyes. Stephanie whispered something to her lawyer. I sat down, raised my right hand, and swore in. The questions started basic. Name, rank, relation to the deceased. Then they got to intent. Why do you believe your father intended for you to take over the family business? I didn't have to answer with assumptions. I had the letter. It was submitted as Exhibit E. I read it aloud, word for word, while the courtroom went pin-drop silent. Even Evelyn looked rattled. When asked how I came into possession of the letter, I explained Susan's role, my father's assistant, trusted for over a decade, who'd followed his instructions exactly. Stephanie's lawyer tried to discredit it, claimed emotional manipulation and hearsay by assistant. Then Susan herself took the stand and calmly explained how she'd watched my father sign that envelope himself, with tears in his eyes. She even had a time-stamped voicemail from him, reminding her to deliver it if things ever go sideways. We played the voicemail in court. My father's voice filled the room. Calm, tired, steady. "Susan, hey. Just confirming the envelope's in the second drawer. If Rachel ever needs it, she'll know why. Thank you." Stephanie looked like she'd seen a ghost. Evelyn's mouth twitched, but she didn't speak. The judge paused the hearing for 10 minutes, probably to let everyone breathe. When we reconvened, things got worse for them. Because next came a surprise witness. One I hadn't expected. My cousin Jordan. Formerly neutral. The type who stayed out of drama unless fantasy football was involved. He'd been working part-time in operations at the company before Dad passed. He stepped forward and testified that Evelyn had once asked him to help her clean up the shared drive and delete anything that looked redundant or confusing after Dad went into hospice. She offered him a bonus in cash. He refused, but never said anything until now. When asked why he came forward, Jordan said something I'll never forget. "I didn't think it mattered. I figured Rachel would handle it. She always does. But watching Stephanie spin lies online, and Evelyn acting like she'd been blindsided, I couldn't keep pretending." Stephanie muttered something under her breath. Her lawyer pinched the bridge of his nose like he had a migraine. The judge asked if Jordan had any documents. He did. He brought his old work laptop, which still had partial backups of pre-hospice file structures, including documents that Evelyn had marked for deletion. Most of them were insurance forms and pension instructions. None of them pointed to her, but all of them pointed away from any kind of shared leadership. Dad had clearly been preparing for a full transfer to me. By the end of the day, the judge issued a preliminary ruling. The court recognizes sufficient evidence of fraud and mismanagement by secondary trustees. The real will is entered into record, and all assets will be temporarily frozen pending full forensic review. Stephanie started to cry. For real this time. Evelyn leaned back, eyes unfocused. Me? I stood and left the courtroom without a word. I had nothing left to say that the evidence hadn't already screamed. I didn't go home after court. I went straight to my car, changed out of my uniform, and drove to the only place that ever really helped me think back to base. Not for duty, not for meetings, just to run. I wasn't training for anything specific. I just needed motion. Repetition. Sweat. Something I could control. Stephanie's tears in court weren't what shook me. It was how fast she folded the moment things didn't go her way. For someone who'd spent years positioning herself as the face of the family, she cracked fast under pressure. Evelyn, on the other hand, stayed quiet. Too quiet. That silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And that's what worried me. People like Stephanie implode. People like Evelyn re-strategize. And people like me were trained to outlast both. When I finished running, I sat in my car, checking updates from the trust attorneys and the audit team. That's when I saw an alert from the firm handling Dad's investment portfolio. Stephanie had attempted to access the trust again. Despite the court's freeze order, she tried logging in with her old administrative credentials. She got locked out immediately, but the attempt was recorded, time-stamped, and flagged. She was still trying to control assets that didn't belong to her. That was stupid. But what wasn't stupid? Evelyn's move that followed. By noon the next day, a story dropped in a local business journal. Insider family feud threatens beloved logistics company. A source close to the matter claimed the Navy daughter Me had manipulated her way into power, using military intimidation and personal vendettas. It wasn't just petty. It was calculated. This wasn't about sympathy anymore. It was about discrediting me completely, making it look like I was a rogue officer, abusing my position, and breaking up a grieving family. But here's the part they always forget. You don't out-strategize someone who's trained in intelligence protocols, lives on checklists, and breathes chain of command. That afternoon, I met with Commander Rains again. This time, I initiated it. I need a formal statement from JAG, confirming no active investigations, no complaints, and that I followed all code of conduct policies during this process. He nodded. You think they're building something? They're trying. I want to cut them off before they can submit even a whisper to the media or probate court. He got it. Within 24 hours, I had the signed memo. I also requested character references from 2 superior officers and my ethics instructor from Officer Training Command. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being thorough. Meanwhile, my Aunt Carol called me from her landline because, of course, she still had one, and said a rumor was going around that I'd threatened Evelyn during hospice. She told Cousin Lena you cornered her in the kitchen and said you'd take everything after Dad passed. I didn't even flinch. That never happened. I know, she said, but Evelyn's planting things. Just wanted you to be aware. Thanks. Click. They were building their new narrative. Rachel, the bitter Navy officer, who'd been waiting in the wings, planning a takeover, that I was ruthless, that I was dangerous, So, I leaned in. I scheduled an exclusive sit-down with the Register, a long-established business and military affairs outlet with a reputation for being dry, factual, and thorough. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I brought documentation. We sat for 2 hours, going line by line through financial abuse, Dad's actual succession plan, the attempts to erase it, and how I only stepped in when I had no other option. I didn't make myself a hero. I made myself a service member trained to follow process, built for systems, and allergic to chaos. The article dropped 2 days later with the headline, "A Navy Officer, a Father's Will, and a Family Business Under Fire, When Duty Extends Beyond the Uniform." End quote. What's 70-40 into the 70? The public perception shifted instantly. Stephanie's Instagram comments turned. Evelyn's quiet supporters started asking harder questions. Cousins who'd stayed out of it sent me quiet texts like, "Okay, I'm starting to see what's really going on here." But the real pivot? A phone call from a name I hadn't expected to hear again. Mitchell Granger, Dad's first business partner, before Evelyn forced a buyout. He'd been out of the picture for years. "Rachel," he said, "I stayed out of this because I thought it was just family mess. But this isn't a mess, it's a takeover attempt. If you want a co-signer for your version of the truth, I'm in. Your dad never wanted Stephanie near the company. It's dues into the was." He then offered to testify on my behalf. "Why now?" I asked. "Because your father was the best man I ever worked with, and because I see too much of him in you to stay quiet." I didn't cry. Not even a little. But I did stand up from my desk and walk outside, just to breathe. Evelyn and Stephanie had tried to turn the truth into noise. But noise doesn't work when the facts are louder. The subpoena arrived on a Thursday afternoon, slipped into my mailbox like it was just another utility bill. Evelyn and Stephanie were suing me for defamation, emotional distress, and malicious interference with inheritance rights. I laughed before I even made it back up the stairs. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly them backed into a corner, caught red-handed, and still trying to flip the narrative like it owed them rent. But this wasn't amateur hour anymore. They weren't the only ones playing offense. The best part? The suit was filed in a jurisdiction known for tossing out weak civil claims faster than a TSA agent dumps bottled shampoo. Their attorney, some boutique inheritance lawyer with a law firm website that still ran on Flash, clearly didn't read the room. Or the case law. But the lawsuit wasn't for the win. It was for distraction. It was a delay tactic, a smokescreen to make me look aggressive, vindictive, unstable. The story they'd been trying to sell all along. That's why the real punch came 2 hours later, when an article dropped online, Navy officer accused of family sabotage in bitter will dispute. Stephanie had finally found someone willing to publish her version of events. It was everything you'd expect. Dramatic quotes about being emotionally abused by a jealous half-sister, lines about how I used military tactics to intimidate my grieving stepmother, and the pièce de résistance, a photo of her crying in front of Dad's grave, clearly staged, complete with a black veil she definitely didn't wear that day. The photo credit? Stephanie B. She'd submitted her own press photos. I sent the link to my attorney, who called me back within minutes. "You want to go nuclear or tactical?" "Tactical," I said, "always." So we started quietly building a countersuit, libel, false light, malicious prosecution. I wasn't about to be the one who lost control of the story now. Meanwhile, someone was watching me. I noticed it the next morning at the gym. A guy in street clothes pretending to stretch near the treadmills, looking up every time I moved. I caught him on camera when I accidentally dropped my phone. Camera side up. That same guy popped up 3 more times in 3 days. At the grocery store, outside base housing, and once parked 2 cars behind me near the law office. Was it Stephanie's idea? Evelyn's? Their lawyer? Didn't matter. Because tailing a Navy officer on federal property, especially near a secure base, wasn't just creepy, it was potentially a felony. I filed a report with base security and handed over the footage. They took it seriously. Within hours, they had a license plate and name, Robert Keene, a private investigator, licensed, hired through a third-party legal consulting group. And guess who'd paid the invoice? Not Evelyn. Not even Stephanie. It was the trust's old PR manager, the same one Dad had fired 6 years ago for leaking internal contracts to competitors. The spiderweb kept growing. And the center? Evelyn. Her name showed up on wire transfers, connected to that consultant group. She was funneling money through one of Dad's old shell accounts, the ones he'd shut down years ago, but she'd apparently reactivated using outdated passwords she never should have had. That was enough. We filed the countersuit. Not just civil, criminal, forgery, identity fraud, misuse of trust resources, harassment, and conspiracy to interfere with a federal service member's duties. My military counsel even joined the case. What they didn't expect was the tech audit. My legal team brought in cybersecurity experts to trace the file paths and metadata of all the documents Evelyn had submitted during the lawsuit, including emails, PDFs, and statements. They found several had been altered within the last month. Stephanie's emotional breakdown email, dated from the week Dad died, actually created the day after the court ruling on the will. Evelyn's joint trust agreement, that supposedly proved I agreed to share assets, fabricated using an old letterhead template and a cut-and-paste signature from a scanned check. And the cherry on top? A hidden folder on Evelyn's desktop labeled Backups, Private. It had drafts of Stephanie's media interview quotes, rewritten multiple times, with notations like, "Make Rachel sound colder," and "add more crying." I didn't need to paint them as liars. They'd done that for me. The judge reviewed the forensic audit results. It took her less than 10 minutes to issue an emergency protective order, blocking Evelyn and Stephanie from accessing any trust-related assets, records, or media for the duration of the case. Their lawsuit crumbled in a single morning. The attorney who filed it tried to withdraw from representation, claiming his clients had withheld material facts. The article about me got quietly removed. Stephanie's tearful photo? Replaced with a stock image of courthouse steps. And the guy following me? He never showed up again. But the damage they tried to cause, the lies, the manipulation, the attempted surveillance, it didn't go away. It just hardened into something else. Something useful. Because for every accusation they'd thrown, I now had evidence, timelines, metadata, motives. What they'd planned as a smear campaign was now an airtight record of coordinated fraud. And I was still standing. No uniform this time. No press release. Just me. A Navy officer. A daughter. The one who never wanted revenge, just truth. And now the truth had teeth. Stephanie arrived at the courthouse wearing all white. White pantsuit, white heels, white sunglasses. Like she was starring in a courtroom reboot of The Real Housewives of Suburban Meltdown. Evelyn followed close behind in muted gray, some misguided attempt to look sympathetic. It didn't work. I didn't dress for theatrics. I wore black slacks, a navy blue blouse, and the same watch my father gave me when I graduated from OCS. Simple. Serious. Intentional. This wasn't just a court date, it was a closing ceremony. The courtroom was cold in the way only government buildings can be, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, carpet designed in the 1980 seconds, and that faint smell of burnt coffee and cheap toner. But when the judge walked in, the energy changed. Judge Callahan wasn't interested in drama. She was interested in facts. And she had been reading every page, every timestamp, every affidavit, and every altered document. "This isn't a family dispute," she said, looking directly at Evelyn. "This is calculated fraud executed over multiple years for financial gain." Stephanie squirmed. Their attorney tried to object before the hearing even properly began, citing emotional duress and media interference. The judge shut it down so fast the court stenographer didn't even bother to lift her fingers. And then came the part they didn't expect. The forensic accountant. We'd hired him months ago. A quiet guy named Calvin, who looked like he taught high school algebra and smelled faintly of cinnamon gum. He'd spent 87 days tracing every dollar Stephanie and Evelyn had touched from Dad's business, trust, and personal accounts. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was devastating. He laid out everything. The improper withdrawals, the illegal shell transfers, the tax evasion, and the fake invoices that Stephanie had submitted to the company for consulting services. And then, he dropped the final number, $783,924.62. That's what they'd stolen. From the company. From the estate. From me. And that didn't even include what they tried to manipulate through false legal filings. Stephanie looked like she might faint. Evelyn's jaw clenched so tightly her temple twitched. My attorney stood, handed over a folder, and said, "Your Honor, this is a sworn deposition from Mitchell Granger, the company's original co-founder, confirming that neither of these women had authorization to touch these accounts under any version of the company's operating agreement." The judge didn't even blink. Then she looked at me. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, do you have any closing statement?" I stood slowly. My boots didn't make a sound on the carpet. "I didn't come here to punish them," I said. "I came here to protect what my father built and what they tried to erase. I'm not asking for vengeance, just accountability." The room went quiet. Evelyn stared at the floor. Stephanie was blinking too fast. Judge Callahan adjusted her glasses and began reading her judgment into the record. Stephanie was ordered to repay the full amount plus interest. Evelyn was stripped of all rights as trustee and executor. Both were barred from accessing or managing any part of the estate or company ever again. But the real hit? The judge ruled in favor of my civil countersuit and referred the matter to the district attorney for criminal review. "This level of deception," she said, "goes beyond civil misconduct. It rises to the level of criminal conspiracy to defraud." Their faces collapsed. It was the first honest emotion I'd seen from either of them in months. They weren't worried about money anymore. They were worried about jail time. Outside, the media waited. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The facts had already spoken. The court had answered. Back at the company, I walked into my dad's old office, now mine, and sat down at the desk I used to sneak into as a kid when he wasn't home. The desk drawer still had the same wood grain, same squeaky hinge. Inside it, a small envelope I'd kept hidden all this time. My father's last letter, the original one, the one I never submitted to court because I didn't need it to win, but I needed it now. "Rachel," it read, "don't let them convince you you're difficult, because you won't make yourself small. You are the daughter of a builder, a fighter, and a protector. This business was always meant for you, so lead like you serve. And serve like you love. Because I know you do." The paper was worn, smudged from years of rereading, but every word still landed like a salute. Back home, I got a voicemail from my mother's best friend. She'd heard the news. "You did it, Rachel," she said. He'd be so damn proud. Stephanie disappeared from social media. Evelyn sold her house quietly. The last I heard, they were both trying to settle their debts before criminal charges landed, and yes, charges were coming. The Navy never questioned my conduct. The company grew stronger, leaner, and more loyal. Employees told me the air felt different, cleaner, like everyone could finally exhale. And at the next board meeting, I opened with one sentence. "No one who puts ego above ethics will ever sit at this table again." Applause wasn't necessary, but it happened anyway. Later that night, I stood in the living room of my new home. Same city, new keys, new name on the deed. Mine. I poured a glass of Dad's favorite bourbon, walked to the fireplace, and placed one item on the mantel, my Navy cover. Not because I needed to remember the fight, but because I wanted to remember how I won. Not with anger. Not with revenge. But with strategy, discipline, and absolute, unshakable truth. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe. A new story is coming,